this gospel very very familiar, it should also ring a familiar tone with us. Something we may even recognize a lot these days, where both in the first reading, the one from Ezekiel, and also, especially in the gospel, we find people who are dealing with a major loss and grieving and doing it in various ways. One of the things that I like in the gospels is we have this family, uh, two sisters and a brother, Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and they appear both in John's gospel and in Luke's gospel. And across these stories, um, their personalities are pretty consistent. Martha is an active doer. Remember that from the story in Luke where she was trying to serve everybody and was mad that her sister sat at her at Jesus' feet, not helping but learning. And so in this case where Lazarus has died, Martha is stomping around, furiously mad, while Mary is sitting in the house and crying. So when Martha heard that Jesus had come finally, she went out to meet him, and she was boiling mad. We always read this, that when she came up to him, and the first thing she said is, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. We always read it kind of like that, but really, she probably was, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Yeah. And she says, but, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus answers, your brother will rise again. Martha's response again, you have to get, I think, it's kind of like what she's really saying. She says, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. What she's really saying, I know he's going to rise again in the resurrection on the last day, unsaid, fat lot of good that does me now. But to that, Jesus answers with one of those great I am statements, where he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me will never die. So, we have this story now that goes on with Jesus going to the tomb and raising Lazarus from the dead. And in that, he's demonstrating that what he just said was true in a tangible way. That resurrection and life abide in Jesus. And by raising Lazarus, who'd been dead 4 days, he showed for everyone that yes, life is in Jesus. And those who commit, who have the Spirit of Christ, this is what Paul was saying in the epistle, those who have the Spirit of Christ have life no matter what the state of their physical body is. Now, I think in a way, what's probably closer to our situation today is a situation that the prophet Ezekiel was dealing with in the first reading. Obviously, in the gospel, we have a story of someone that everybody knew and loved had died, and all of the loss that goes with that. And I hope not too many of us in this pandemic are going to have to experience that. But in the story of the Valley of the Dry Bones, the setting was that the people were of Israel were in exile in Babylon, and they'd been taken in captivity after Babylon had been conquered, or when Jerusalem had been conquered by the Babylonians. And in a sense, they didn't know how to live out where they were no longer in their home country. It's like they didn't have a life anymore. And I think one of the best ways to get a grip of how people were feeling in that time is Psalm 137. So I want to read the first part of that to you just to get a sense of the level of despair that the people felt. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered you, O Zion. As for our harps, we hung them up on the trees in the midst of that land. For those who led us away captive asked for us a song, and our oppressors called for mirth. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song upon an alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. There's more in that psalm that's expressing anger, and I'm not going to read that part, but to get the clear sense of the fact people felt like they didn't have a life anymore as captives in a foreign land. And so in the story of Ezekiel, God grants him this vision where he's transported to a valley full of dry, dead bones. And God commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones, and then they come together and they take on flesh, but they're not alive yet. And then God tells him to prophesy to the breath. Now, in Hebrew, as in several other languages, the word for breath and wind and spirit is all the same word. In this case, ruach. So when he said prophesy to the breath that it may come, and prophesy to the spirit, and to come from the four winds and give these people breath and life. And it does, and the people come alive and stand a great multitude. And then God says to Ezekiel, these are the people of Israel. Go back and tell them, I will give them a life. I will return them, and they will live and be able to worship me. And it ends with, and I will put my spirit within them. I think a lot of us right now are feeling disjointed. Our life isn't what we think it should be. Some of us probably deal better with our self-quarantining, social distancing, and all the fears that go with living through a pandemic. My daughter was asking me the other day how I was doing. She's going, Dad, how are you managing, being inside the house all the time? And I said to her, I said, Rebecca, I'm an introvert. I could do this forever. And it's not so hard for me. But I have a sense it may be really hard for a lot of people. And there's a sense that we don't feel like we have our life, or our life isn't what we want it to be. And there's really not a lot we can do about that part. We're just simply going to have to live through this terrifying time. But there are more than one way to do that. And the one that our readings from the Bible suggest today is that by placing our lives in the hands of God, and especially leaning on Jesus, whose Spirit is in us, we can live in that way. I found when I was suffering with cancer that the fear of death never went away. But when I really focused on Jesus and my faith, I found that there was something more powerful than the fear that could sustain me. It's not that we're going to go dancing around happy, but we can have actually true peace and find a joy that's deeper than what we're dealing with in every way. It is my hope and prayer that all of us will come through this healthy and safe, and that we will be able to return to the kind of intimacy we had before this pandemic struck. But no matter what, the Spirit of God is with us, the Spirit of Christ is in us, and in that Spirit, with that Spirit, is the very breath of life that will continue to uphold us and keep us no matter what. Amen.